us about the Community Church of Durham and who you are, and sort of a little bit of a context to the conversation that we're going to have here.
Great, yeah, thanks for the chance to do the conversation, and particularly the ongoing kind of effort that we're all in together to do something meaningful and to make a difference. So the Community Church of Durham is a community of the United Church of Christ. It's a wonderful, generous, servant community of God's people in Durham, with a long history of caring deeply for the community that's close, for the Seacoast community, and a long history of caring for the wider world as well. So it's a lovely group of people, lovely community of Christ's disciples. It's been around for several hundred years, so it has a long history in this part of New Hampshire, and really over the last 20 years in particular has really been a leader in New Hampshire in a lot of different ways, in trying to imagine and then trying to cast a vision of a church, of a kind of Christianity that is kind and generous and brave and inclusive and deeply engaged in the world around us. So it's been my privilege to have been called to serve here as the pastor about 18 months ago, and I've been doing it with you all for 18 months, and it's a privilege. It's a real privilege to be walking with this people at this moment, which is so fraught with so many anxieties and so much uncertainty. But to be walking with a group of people that are deeply hopeful and committed at the same time is a real gift to me.
Yeah. Well, I've only been a part of the community church for a couple of years now. And I do know that immigration in particular has been a recurring theme and something that's initially attracted my wife and I and our family to this church. And I wouldn't say prior to coming to the community church, within the last couple of years, that it was like a top issue, but it's, my eyes have been opened. I mean, there have been folks that have done Immigration 101 sort of talks and presentations that have been open to congregations across the faith-based and non-faith-based communities around the Seacoast, right? And just rubbing shoulders with people who are open and aware of the flaws within our immigration system, but ultimately interested in being generous and hospitable to those in need. And so I wonder, as you think about our community, but maybe Christianity as a whole, or the UCC, specifically, where do you sense that this focus comes from for our community? In your view as a minister and as a member of this community, where does that focus emerge?
It's a great question. I think it comes to us in a couple of different ways. First, and maybe foremost, is that there's a prophetic voice throughout the Bible, Hebrew Bible, Christian scriptures. There's a strong, bold prophetic voice that insists that our care for immigrants reflects our faith and our generosity toward God. The prophets, again and again in the Hebrew tradition, the prophets are always talking about the necessity, the requirement that God's people care for those who are wandering and those who are traveling and those who are migrants, because God's people recognize that their own history was a history of a migrant people. And so God required of them that they practice generosity and justice with migrants and sojourners, as well as children and the vulnerable and the widows of wars. And I mean, but the prophets were so consistent and so bold on that point. And Jesus really picks up that prophetic tradition. That's the Jewish tradition that Jesus picks up and runs with in his own ministry and in his own life. So it's just so fundamental to Christian, Jewish, I'd say Muslim tradition as well. It's just so fundamental that we are on the lookout for folks who are traveling, for folks who are on the move, particularly for folks who are on the move because they're afraid and because they're vulnerable and because they're seeking to get away from a frightening situation and into a better one for themselves and their families. That's really at the heart of the Jewish and Christian tradition that I hold dear, and I think our church holds dear. So first and foremost, it's that prophetic call to care for immigrants. We're not making it up. It comes from really, really deep. And then there's this other piece in the Christian tradition about the practice of hospitality, John, and you know this, and it's such a core practice across thousands of years of Christianity, thousands of years of Christian community, that we're called to be a hospitable people, not just a kind people, not just a generous people, but a people who open up our homes, our lives, our families to these vulnerable folks who are wandering through and who are seeking refuge. We believe in our own Christian language, in our own Christian tradition, we believe that Jesus is among us in the wanderer. Jesus is among us in the one who is without a home. Jesus is among us in the one who is most vulnerable. So for us, the practice of hospitality is, again, just so core to our practice of Christian faith itself. So we're getting it from the Jewish tradition, which is our tradition. We're getting it very much from the Christian tradition, which is also our tradition. I think it's just so key to who we are. And then I would add that in American Christianity and in American civic life, even apart from the religious dimension, our history is a history of immigrants, right? And we are a healthier community, a healthier nation, a healthier national community when we are welcoming and integrating folks who are seeking out this place for all kinds of reasons. That's core to who we've always been and what's made our democracy thrive and what's made our life together unique. So whether you take the religious route in, which I do, or the civic American route in, which I do also, it's this work with immigrants, with particular immigrants, but also with the whole issue of immigration is fundamentally Christian for us. Yeah.
You mentioned the prophets, and I know Walter Brueggemann you read, and I've read a little bit of, and he talks about the prophetic imagination, right, and needing to rediscover that. And this is going off script a little bit, but and I know yesterday you preached a little bit from a prophet. Do you have a favorite, like biblical prophet that you, especially maybe one that's timely for you right now?
Well, I mean, Jeremiah is my favor's now. I mean, maybe next year somebody else will be my favorite, but because John, and Jeremiah is speaking to a community on the edge of exile, and then to a community in the midst of their own exile. And I just think that's so timely for us as a church right now, as the culture right now. And Jeremiah is hard, I mean, he loving and plugged into to the prophetic tradition, but he's also hard. He insists that God asks a lot of us, and with a lot of grace and a lot of love and a lot of promise of presence, but that God insists that we take up the mantle, of care for these vulnerable communities, and even risk our own vulnerability on their behalf. And I think in our own season of exile here, as we wander through this pandemic and all the other things we're going through, I think it's really important that we learn this again, how to be God's vulnerable people in exile, and how to care with vulnerable hearts for the most vulnerable among us. Jeremiah insists on that.